live.
Hello.
Fleur.
Wow, it's been very exciting.
We'll talk about this background in a second. I'll just do a couple of introductory things and then we're going to leap into this. So, hello, I'm Jessica Bellamy. Very nice to see you all. Thank you for tuning in. I'm going to introduce this wonderful person in a second. First of all, just to let you all know that I'm coming to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri and Boon Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I would like to acknowledge the lands on which this broadcast reaches and to acknowledge First Nations people as the traditional custodians of this country and whose cultures are among the oldest living cultures in human history. I pay respect to the elders of these communities, past and present, and I would like to extend that to emerging community leaders. I would also recognise that sovereignty was never ceded and that colonisation is an ongoing process. It was, is, and always will be Aboriginal land. So I'm here today as part of Toolkit's regional playwriting. This is a 12-week process, which is a really beautiful kind of training and mentorship program for young regional playwrights. The way it works is there's 6 weeks of kind of seminars and kind of concentrated teaching about playwriting in group sessions. Then there's 6 weeks interspersing those particular workshops with one-on-one meetings between those playwrights and me. And part of these big workshops is that some of them are run by other people, which is part of what today is about. But this program is a really exciting one. It's so nice to be here and to be running it and to be busy with it and enjoying meeting these really smart young writers. And it wouldn't be possible if it weren't for some wonderful people and organisations. They include, obviously, Express Media, Alicia Herman, Carclu, Country Arts South Australia, and the Copyright Agency. So thank you to all of those individuals and organisations, which are made up of individuals, of course. So on to the main event, Fleur Kilpatrick. So exciting to have her here. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about her, then we're going to jump into a bit of a conversation. So Fleur Kilpatrick is an award-winning playwright, a director, and an arts commentator. She holds a postgraduate diploma of directing and a master's in playwriting from the VCAM. She is a lecturer at Monash Centre for Theatre and Performance and the co-founder of Lonely Company, working to support emerging playwrights create sustainable careers. Fleur is also a PhD candidate and she's researching how we teach care in theatre. So care for self, others, and care for the environment, which sounds amazing. Fleur's plays include Whale, Blessed, The City They Burned, Terrestrial, Yours the Face, Insomnia Cat Came to Stay, and many more, including her new show, Rebel, which she just finished writing today.
Well, at least I finished a draft. So there was a beginning, middle, and end, which is beautiful. A very nice feeling.
So exciting.
It might be the most excited masterclass there has ever been. I'm just like, through the roof.
I would expect nothing less of you and I being filmed and people having to watch us talk about theatre. So just to wrap up her bio, it will premiere at the Melbourne Fringe Festival in 2020, so keep an eye on the program. Fleur, you can also hear on 3RR Smart Arts with Richard Watts, and that's the fortnightly program. Okay, so congratulations, Fleur.
And just being here. Hello. So nice to see you, Jess. It's just like such a pleasure to get to do this. I'm here on the lands of the Kulin Nation. Sorry, no, I'm not. I'm on the lands of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. I've moved here for COVID and been here since March, and it's just so beautiful to get to connect with you back in Melbourne, but also just people all around the country. And it would be lovely even to see in our little chat log if people want to just tell us where they're tuning in from as well. It would be so nice to give a shout out to the lands you're on as well.
We would absolutely love that, yes. And just while we mention that sort of chat function, that is there throughout our conversation. And when Fleur and I were talking about how we wanted to run this and how we wanted to make it as interactive and enjoyable for you as possible, we want this to feel like the strange COVID situation that we're in, which is that we're all learning online. It doesn't mean that there's less excitement, less potential intimacy and conversation and meaningful dialogue. So please do keep sending in the way that you might text your friend a question, text us that question. We want to hear it. We want to interject the conversation with your thoughts or your queries, and for you to be a part of the conversation that we're having. So don't be shy, get involved. Wonderful. And I guess with that in mind, we're probably going to talk a bit about the situation of what it is like being a playwright and an educator right now. So one thing I kind of forgot to do was mention that I am also a playwright and an educator. So while teaching this program, for me, it's been a really nice grounding influence during COVID to have a regular meetings with people to check in with, even just to see the diversity of what's happening in terms of restrictions and openness around the country. It does give you a bit of hope here in Melbourne that, a student is able to go on a weekend writing retreat, even if you are living under a curfew. So, but more generally and more creatively, I know we've had some chats about this before, Fleur, and about creating new work during COVID. And it would be great to hear a bit about what it's been like devising Rebel, how it's changed due to COVID, and how, some aspects of the work may have actually benefited from this strange new experience, if at all.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wasn't going to put on a play this year. I genuinely, maybe crazily, but genuinely was like, I wanted to jump in to this trying to make art in the year 2020 thing, and inflicted this on myself. I was, Rebel was going to be a much longer process. Most of my things take 3 years. And this year I was like, no, it's time. And that's really because the art that I've experienced here in my bedroom, speaking of the intimacy of this teaching, here you are in my room, welcome. The art I've experienced here, I've really felt held and seen by, and I've been like, oh my gosh, that artist knew I was sitting here by myself and they made something for me. And it's felt so special. So I really wanted to give that to people as well, and to have the opportunity to be like, hey, from my room to your room, like, let's tell some stories. Let's be the creative, adaptable people that we can be. In terms of teaching as well, I think right now is an amazing time to be teaching art, because all of us, we've been doing this a while, Jess. Like I've been doing it for 17 years, I think. And it's very easy when you've been doing something a long time to have some elements of your practice that you're not questioning too hard, that sort of are intrinsic, are just part of what you did. You figured it out when you were 19 and that works, and you keep going. In COVID, we are having to go back to the most basic questions, having to go back to what is theatre? Who is theatre for? How do I make it? Who are my collaborators? Why am I doing this? These are all wonderful questions. And so every time I teach, I get to approach this both as someone with, almost 2 decades of experience, but also a beginner's mentality. And that's a wonderful thing for a teacher to have. I know I'm sounding almost like a bit Pollyanna, like I just want to say I also know it's a shit year. But creating art with people and trying to redefine my art and being a beginner again right now, I'm pretty into that. that excites me. That warms my heart. So so it's been really fun. And the thing is, as artists as well, we don't want to make art that feels less than the thing we were trying to make. We want to be making it to feel of this moment, and that's such a wonderful challenge.
And we've talked a bit when you and I have chatted beforehand about how it's not just about going, all right, better make this show on Zoom because it's the only way to make a show right now, but actually, and we will talk about this being a structure-themed session. Why is this work essential that it is an online work? What about it needs to be democratic, immediately accessible, available for people wherever they want to be? How does the theme of it, the story of it, what we're needing to get people to think about tied up in the form of delivery, which I find quite exciting to think about if we are making things for the right now. Yeah.
Oh, it's just so I mean, that should always be the challenge, shouldn't it, to make art for this moment. And yet, because of funding, because of all the ways in which art works, quite often we are, I am often writing art for 3 years in the future. And so right now there is something about going back to basics and having to think on our feet and work in this in very immediate way that potentially means we're going to do something a bit magical. That's the hope. That's the hope.
Love that. Now, we've hit the 10-minute mark because we like talking about things. So
love a chat. Love a chat.
Love a chat. So we're going to talk about the kind of content of this evening, and we've created a few little starter questions for ourselves to prompt the conversation. Also, we've received a few messages from people who are in the chat, so jump on there and join them, and they've been checking in about where they are, so thank you so much. So we're going to start with the question, which is that what do we think theatrical form means to us? So since you're the academic, I'm going to get you to think about that first.
All right. Well, I mean, form is how a play works, and that's not necessarily the plot. For me, quite specifically, form is about the play's relationship to the audience, the play's relationship to space. It's the structure of the play, but again, not just in terms of plot. We're thinking in terms of how this thing works. What is powering it? What is the motor inside it? How is it chugging along? I think that's what it means to me, and I think I've got quite a specific audience-centered thinking around form, which I hope is exciting to people.
Yeah, definitely. For me, I sometimes think about it of like there's different levels of shelves, like in the library or in the supermarket or something, and sometimes when you're first drafting, you just go with the form that you know is simplest to get out a quick story, and then you might write that and then go, okay, that's that version of that, but also is there the spark or the magic or the distinguishing factor or the sort of images that are central to the world that I'm creating, and are they there when I tell it in a traditional formal structure? So, and I guess by formal structures and things, it's the ways we expect a realist Australian play to work, or the ways that we expect a farce to look. And probably what we'll be chatting about quite a bit today is that there's a lot of traditional stuff that it's nice to learn, and probably the best way to learn about it for me was reading a lot of plays from theatrical history. But also we never want to feel entirely constrained and confined by those forms, because why did we become a writer if we're letting that happen to us?
Yeah, I mean, I think traditional form is incredibly helpful for providing these, providing some anchor points, not only for you, but for the audience. Any of us who thinks that we're not using traditional form at all is kidding ourselves. When an audience walks into a theatre, they are walking in and they are feeling some form of history a lot of the time. And sometimes what they are feeling in terms of that form of history is, I'm excluded from this. Oh shit, I'm meant to know something that everyone else here seems to know. There's a way of behaving that everyone else is doing. So sometimes there is that thing of people walking in and playing catch up, which is not a great feeling. And that in itself, the like theatre building even, I think can indicate form in itself. Yeah. And if a space says you are welcome, I feel like I've gone a little bit off on a tangent already, but that's
such a good point though, because you think about how can those plays we've seen where we walk in and someone greets us, and having done a play like that before where I have greeted the audience, the consistent shock that I'm faced with by the audience who's just expecting to have to sit in their seat and turn off their phone and be quiet and be respectful, it's shocking, and that's exciting to play with.
Yeah, well, I think of taking my niece to see Unicorn Theatre in the UK. She lives over there. So I took her. And Australia doesn't have a theatre company like this, where they are a children's theatre company that has their own dedicated theatre space. Or Arena might be kind of making that out in Bendigo now. But you walk into it and it is a building made for children. And as soon as you walk in, there's things on the floor saying, spin around, jump up and down, turn in a circle. You walk in and the space says to the kids, you're meant to be here. And we want you to be a kid in this space, not just a short adult. And it also is saying to their grown-ups, it's okay. They're going to be a kid here. Like, enjoy that. So that's a really lovely thing as well to sort of think about. Who are you welcoming in as from the beginning? Form starts like as soon as an audience member arrives or even books their ticket, they are experiencing your play in some way. So that's all stuff that I'm thinking about. Essentially for me, when we come back, I love the bookshelf thing, by the way. Sorry, brain jumping all over the place. That's really nice. But I think essentially the big question of art in the 20th century is, what are we for? What's the purpose of us? Are we here to be beautiful? Are we here to entertain? Are we here to make change? And several of the big sort of theorist dudes of theatre, like Boal and Brecht and other men whose names start with B, they came down firmly on the side of theatre is here to elicit change in the audience. Now, I only mention this story because I think that then we can see with these two guys what different conclusions they came to about what that meant. Boal is very like blatant about how specific his theory is. He's like, if you want to activate Argentinian peasants, this is how you do it. This is my experience. Brecht is a bit more like, guys, this is the way I've found it. But even Brecht acknowledges that, like, even Brecht can't do Brecht perfectly, kind of thing. But I think what is so good about reflecting on these guys is that they had such clarity of purpose. And that, for me, is what I'm looking for. It's asking that question that they both had to ask, which is, what do I want to do to or for my audience? And if the answer is I want to entertain them, like, that is a noble goal. I mentioned these really political dudes, but I don't want to shit on people who are like, I'm here to entertain in the year 2020. Like, I salute you. And joy right now is like the highest thing you can do. And I'm so into people who are just like, I want to make people feel great. But that's a goal. And having that clarity of purpose dictates your form to me. Like the plays for me that have been the hardest have been the ones where I wasn't clear on what I was trying to do or who I was trying to do it for. Whale, which structurally is probably one of the most complex plays I've written, and from the outside people would look at it and be like, wow, that looks hard. It was the easiest play in the world in so many ways because I had such certainty about where it was going to and where I wanted to take people from and drop them off at the end. So any choice, any feedback from actors, any feedback from test audiences, all was in the context of knowing exactly the shape and the drive and the direction of this play. So it was fine. It was easy. The bones of that play were so sturdy it could take whatever we threw at it because we knew where she was headed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I would love to hear a bit more for people that aren't familiar with Whale, like that process of innovating with the formal structure within that you created it in, and how you played with it, how you tested those boundaries with it. What was that like?
So Whale, I should maybe say as well, I mostly write these days about climate change, and Whale was sort of the first of these plays where I asked that question that art has been asking all of the 20th century. What's the purpose of me? What am I for? And I decided my purpose was to try and make people feel powerful in the face of climate change. And to make them think about power in general, their own, but also the power of Australia as a nation, who holds the power, who we care for, who we consider worthy of care. All these big questions are what goes on. So I guess the thing to know when you write about climate change is that you are walking a tightrope constantly, a tightrope between hope and despair. And if you tip too far to either side, you will fall off the edge and fall into inaction. Because if you just tell everyone, don't worry, it's going to be great, we've got this, and they tip into the hope side, they won't do anything. If you tip them into the despair side, they'll be like, well, it's all screwed anyway, and they won't do anything. Much easier to tip them in that direction, I must say. So we have to tread this careful rope and try and find a way that we're still getting to the end and going, it's worth you trying. It's worth you doing something. So just to give the very broad brushstrokes of Whale, Whale is based on the story of Jonah and the whale, which is essentially the ocean is raging or rising in our case, and we need to throw someone overboard in order to calm the seas. And who we're going to throw overboard is a Pacific island. From the start of the play, we talked about arriving. From the start of the play, the audience are asked some questions. How did you get here? On a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about climate change? On a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about audience participation? And based on those questions, they are given lanyards, and those lanyards have the number of people they are there to represent, a little bit of information about the island that they are a representative of, and a stone from their island. Mm-hmm. And if they said, I hate audience participation, they get a red lanyard and the actors won't bother them. So you come in and there's punch and you're told, tonight we're going to solve climate change here in the Northcote Town Hall or whatever venue you're performing in. We've got to do it, but the way we're going to do it is we're going to kill someone. Sorry, that's just how it works. And we basically draw some numbers out of a hat and make 3 audience members come up and plead for their island's continued existence. And we've written, their speeches. They're doing a presenter view slideshow. And the audience votes and we kill someone, and that's the end of Act 1. And in Act 2, we have a little party to celebrate. And then the person we sacrificed comes back inside the belly of a talking whale, played by the remarkable Chanella Macri. And it slowly becomes apparent that maybe the big grand gesture thing didn't work. Maybe it will be harder than that. But how the play ends, which I always knew how it would end, is it ends with that audience member turned sacrificial lamb on stage by themselves. The whalers sacrifice themselves to bring him or her or them back to us, and they tell you, I know how to save the world, and then they improvise and tell you how. So it always ends with an audience member who came there thinking they were an audience member telling us the answer, which was really special. The play itself goes on a journey from the audience being told that they are powerful but actually having very little power. Sonia Juarez, who played the host, she will say to you things like, I think this is going really well. Don't you? Say yes. So she will dictate everything you say. So you would start off being told we're going to save the world, but actually you don't have power, to by the end, we haven't saved the world, but you do have power again. You have a voice again. So that journey from powerless to powerful was really important to me and absolutely shaped everything I did. I was like, I want to make people feel this. I also wanted to give Australians to make Australians experience having to plead for the future of their community, which we as Australians make Pacific Island communities do. That's the thing. When they come and visit us and say, can you take action? That's them pleading for the continuation of their community. So we gave people that experience. And we made really visible the power and the decision-making structures that are part of it, that we are participating in on a daily basis. And it's also funny because it's also important to just take the tension out of the room and let people laugh and relax and have a talking whale who takes the audience's questions and has a little Q&A with a talking whale in the middle of it. That's
gorgeous.
That's important too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. Oh man, I wish I had seen it. It's what I've been dwelling on is that it's almost funny thinking about a sort of a line of where people like to sit with the ways in which they play with traditional structures. And by traditional structures, for example, there's the more filmic ones where, you've got a hero's journey and they face many obstacles, they have a major challenge, they win or they lose, and they're forever changed. Or you have a given circumstances, inciting incident, conflict, climax, resolution. And so many plays will use those as their main structure, and then there'll be beautiful other kind of quirks and humour and characters, and that might be what carries the play. then we might be looking at works that are entirely that it's difficult to see where they've borrowed from the way things have always been done, and it might be that other things are what pushes the story along. And then there's a beautiful blend. And one thing that we've been chatting about a bit, because we both read it recently and you teach it sometimes, is the play Kill Climate Deniers. And what I find so fascinating about David's writing is that he's clearly aware of genre and existing forms, and that becomes part of the form in which he tells this story that is also very unexpected and very different, and in a way without the familiarity and the sort of pushing for the hero to get what we know they deserve that we're so comfortable with from traditional forms and play structures and movie structures. It leads us to push for and want something that later we sit back and go, ugh, like that, I shouldn't be gunning for her, but that's what he does. So I guess that's maybe an area it'll be interesting to start talking about in terms of the that blend of influences, where we hold on to what came before and where we reinvent it as something fresh for us. And I wonder how that sits with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, David is hugely influenced by a bunch of different genres. I think, like, I often describe Kill Climate Deniers as like Die Hard, but about climate change. Like, it's an action movie on stage. I spoke to David recently about it, actually, in preparation for teaching it. And he was saying, like, I said, like, how did you manage to write kind of simultaneously the smartest and dumbest play I've read? Like, this play is packed with more climate science and information than any other play I've read, but all with this diehard climate terrorist try to take over Parliament House during a Fleetwood Mac concert, and only an environment minister with nothing to lose can save the day, accompanied by a soundtrack of late 80s, early 90s R&B, is it? No.
Yeah. Kind of disco, dance party, electronic.
Embarrassing not know that type of music. But and also similarly, my dear friend who runs Lonely Company with me and Bridget Mackey, Morgan Rose, Playwright, both she and David have some of the trashiest tastes in art, which I absolutely love, because art can, as I said, you know, this thing of walking in and being like, oh, I'm meant to know stuff. I'm meant to behave in a particular way. And when people like Morgan and David play with these really familiar pop culture tropes, they welcome people into their space and they say, you can enjoy this on whatever level you want to enjoy. If you just want to see an environment minister with nothing to lose kick some terrorist butt, like, David Finnegan has you covered. I was talking to Alicia Herman the other day, who I see in the comments, and she had a beautiful thing. She was like, I want to make art that doesn't make my mum feel dumb. And I was like, yeah,
that's gorgeous.
What a wonderful thing to aim for. And I think that that's something that David does so well. He's like, I'm going to take you on a wild ride, and also you're going to learn stuff, but we're going to have fun. And so he plays with, he's not just operating in the tradition of theatre. He is operating in the tradition of whatever comes to him. And that's such a beautiful thing. There's sometimes theorists, and I can't remember who, but they talk about art like art versus life like art. And to understand art like art, you have to know art. But to understand life like art, you just have to kind of live some life and you'll be right. And I think that's a really lovely thing for us to think about. Who are we welcoming? Who are we welcoming with the mode of talk? Actually, theatre people didn't necessarily like whale as much as non-theatre people. I really think. Like, I think people were a bit like, for one thing, they don't like audience participation. Everyone's like, oh, actors love that. Theatre people come to the theatre and they're like, what? I've been making theatre all week. Don't make me make your theatre for you. So much harder to get them to participate. But, you know, I think it's something to be proud of if you're not making art for other theatre makers and you're making it for people who like die hard,
other people.
or Alicia's mum or anyone.
Exactly. The next thing I'll ask, it's sort of related to the fact we've just had a Twitter question, and feel free to keep bringing in questions. They were sort of asking about resources for playwrights, and since this is specifically a structure-related conversation, I guess what I'd like to ask you is, for example, when in something like Whale or another play, what's the process like when you realise, or as you form or as you build the structure that a work like this will need? Like, at what point? I don't think you would have sat down and gone, audiences are going to come in and they're going to debate how they're going to save the world. Like, that was a process by which you got to the realization that was the way that this play had to happen. Mm-hmm. Is there a way that you can even define or explain your process about, especially with creative structure, which is maybe something that I'll throw to you in a sec to sort of explain what that means, and I guess how it works, what it looks like in a worked example, as if we're maths lecturers.
Well, it's good that you mentioned maths, because one of my favourite ways to start thinking about play comes from an essay by the American playwright Susan Laurie Parks, and she wrote this essay. I can't remember the name of the essay, but in it she includes a bunch of her equations that she writes for her plays. So a lot of the time we talk about the central dramatic question. I love Susan's method of drawing it as an equation. So one of her pictures, for instance, has these two blobby land masses. One is named Africa and one is named America, and there's a little arrow between them with an X, and it says solve for X. So she said, the thing I'm trying to solve in this play is the distance between Africa and America.
Wow.
That's my thing. With Whale, my equation was this little, palm-fronded desert island with a little person on it, an X and a Y. And the X was solve for X, like who is X? Who is this person sitting on a desert island? And Y was the line, the projected sea level, like solve for X and solve for Y. I'm trying to think about these two things. So sometimes for me, asking it as an equation is a slightly less prescriptive way and doesn't lock me in quite as early to thinking about a particular way. But I think there's so many ways to answer this question, isn't there, Jess? Yeah. Another way is time, is just taking time, is not rushing it. Whale and a lot of my plays, they're in my head for about 6 months, and at some point I go, oh, it's a play. Oh, shit. Like, oh, that image that I've had, that wants to be a play. So giving things that time to raise their hand and tell you why you've just been obsessed about this thing can be one of the most beneficial things for me. But when we talk about when we talk about how we get there, it is absolutely for me about that question of what do I want the audience to experience? Where do I want to get them to? But the other way of asking this question is to ask, who are my audience? Specificity of audience is a beautiful thing. In my previous role at Monash, before I was a lecturer, I was the producer programmer there, and I got to commission some beautiful works. I commissioned works specifically for 4-year-olds, and I commissioned works specifically to be made in nursing homes. And one of my favourites, I commissioned a work in collaboration with Vision Australia, which was all for vision impaired and blind audience members. And if that is your starting off point, is I know I'm making something for this audience, that will teach you so much about the form if you follow that audience's interest. So that artist who made the lead artist on that was Jolyon James and Simone French as well. And for instance, early on, the Vision Australia participants that were being interviewed and were part of the creation process all of them basically said, if I go to the theatre, I want to be front row centre. And they were like, all right, so everyone's got to be front row centre. So already from that question, you've got a sense of the space. Suddenly it became an audience of 20 sitting in a little circle where everyone was the front row. And we're fortunate enough that in a university, we could be like, all right, sure, I guess no one's going to make money anyway. Let's go. So that was the first thing. And then you start thinking about they started thinking about these concepts of how do vision impaired people currently engage with the theatre, often with audio descriptions, which can in their own way be isolating and say you are missing out on something. So they started to mess with the notion of audio description as well. And they could describe something in a really creative, beautiful, silly way as well. Then we had guide dogs, we had guide people, all sorts of things. So in that instance, the form is 100% dictated by who you are making the theatre for. Like, don't be afraid. Like, please make theatre for one specific audience. Like, that's what, particularly in the year 2020, that's what we can do. We can be like, hey, Jess, I made this just for you, mate. Like, yeah. And that's so beautiful and so special. And just like, we've just got to get past the idea that theatre means one particular space, one particular audience that we're all aspiring for, this weird main stage thing, whoever that is, and just embrace the people, embrace telling a story for a particular group of people, or that helps.
Yeah. And I guess the thing about having an audience or a community that comes to your work is that doesn't mean that we have to make work that's just sort of palatable and easy and non-confrontational for those people. Not that we're aiming to be confrontational, but we can also be there as a trusted guide that pushes, that asks questions, that provokes conversations. And I think it's nice to think about, who are the people that keep coming along to my work, and what are the ways in which I'm shaped by them and they're shaped by my work.
Yeah. What are your starting questions? Because you how do you think about that in terms of how you start to find a creative form? And I'd love as well to hear about your work. You missed my work whale. Let's also talk about
We'll talk about some work. Good idea. And we also do have a question, so maybe we should allow the question to be a little amuse-bouche before we delve into specific works. So, how integral to your work is the element of a play being live? Or, to keep it more on topic, how much does the live element of a play being performed impact your structure or process? Great question.
Oh, wow. So there's questions to be asked right now in terms of academic culture and things about what even is live, particularly when we're doing things on Zoom. A colleague of mine is pretty like committed to the idea that TikTok is live, even though I put it out there. I record myself doing a dance, put it out there, but then the fact that Jess picks it up and also records the dance, the response of the audience is what makes it live. So that's one very academic answer to that, but with TikTok involved. But I mean, I think it's all about life, particularly when it comes to answering really big questions or tackling really difficult topics like climate change. I think it's interesting that both Whale and Kill Climate Deniers are quite out there in terms of form and are both about climate change, because I think both David and I have sort of gone, oh shit, this is a big new problem, and to tackle it we need to connect with the audience or interact with the audience in different ways. We need to be startling to get past this barrier of fear that people are walking in with. The given circumstances in a theatre about climate change is terror, basically. So we need surprising ways to get past that and lead our audiences. And you can do that with late 80s, early 90s R&B or talking whales.
Absolutely. I was thinking, sorry, were you finishing something?
I am done.
Done. I was just thinking about the live element, and for me, theatre being live is why I love it. Like, I've always people think it's a joke, but it's not. But I've always said I love that in theatre at any moment you could scream and you could just like utterly change the show that you're in. Like, that power for me is dizzyingly exciting. And I've never done it. and I won't, because I respect theatre makers. But even just the fact of, like, someone's not well or something goes wrong, it's exciting, and you don't really get that with things that aren't live. But all that said, I think this really is an important structural question, because then it just comes to, what are the works to make that don't need to be live to still have impact? So at the moment, I'm doing a bit of dramaturgy on some audio monologues written by Michelle Lee, and they're going to be created for people to kind of dip into when they want to. So it's not like everyone at the same time will be there. But then again, as someone who's doing like YouTube yoga at the moment, and one thing that the lady who runs the classes says all the time is, this is dip in and do when you want, but the odds are that someone around the world is doing this Introduction to Spinal Flexibility course at the same time as you are. And isn't that's almost a different type of beautiful, because wow, like, you're in Texas and you're in Malaysia and you're in Melbourne and we're all doing the same yoga class. That's pretty beautiful to me. So basically, again, I think it's sort of the same answer that Fleur and I will keep giving, which is that if the work benefits from the fact that it is made in that way, then it doesn't matter that it's not live, and it's not us doing like a crappy version of another art form that we're not comfortable making, but it's us telling the story that's made to not be told live in a way that's not live. And maybe our job during COVID is just to work out, what are the stories that don't need a collective of people breathing the same air, which is a dangerous idea to think about right now, all in the same room together. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think that thing that I said earlier about you never want your theatre to feel like, oh, this would have been great if only they could, if only they could have all been together. That goes for everything. We always want our decisions to be the right ones. A really good way to start thinking about making theatre this year, I find, is just purely writing a list of, like, if you're going to use Zoom or going to use Google Hangouts, what does Google Hangouts do better than theatre? What does it do not so well? I mean, personally, I'm super into the chat and the comments and things like that. That can be exciting. We can also be kind of slippery with what's actually live versus pre-recorded and actually kind of challenge that idea. We can also collaborate with people in different places to us. That is so exciting to me. There's like that I am here in Adelaide, which I love being here in Adelaide, but also my dear collaborator is in Melbourne, and I've made this work by talking to people all around the country, and that's a really beautiful thing to get to in this moment. Create a piece that is really specifically for you in your house, but also has this sense of a national conversation. So for me, that's why I'm excited about it.
Yeah,
and that, like, Zoom does that better than theatre.
Yeah. And even if we're not putting on works over Zoom, like if, for example, I know a lot of us have had seasons that just were not, were cancelled this year and they can't be put on because they're not Zoom shows. For me, it has been fun to think about collaboration over Zoom in generating future work for whatever the future of theatre looks like. And I was reflecting, I've been writing a new play for young actors, so sort of 10 to 13 years old, while I've been in lockdown. And I wrote a list because I've got to do a little grant kind of reflection soon about all the things that I did that were different. So normally I'd meet with people's children or I'd go into a school. This time questionnaires that I wrote were given to kids from their parents and they filled them in. I met my dramaturg over Zoom. I did a play reading with my best friends over Zoom, which was one of the funniest things ever because they're all playing 10-year-olds, like should be acting about the way a 10-year-old would act. So it is, while we're not saying, I don't think everyone should feel pressured to create the best possible works over Zoom straight away, because it is a difficult time to be creating. And, but it's nice to know that when we feel the urge is there, that we can innovate with form and style and presentation.
Absolutely. I mean, we've just got to keep acknowledging we're in the middle of a pandemic. If that's not exactly the most inspiring thing to you, that is so fine. Something I quite like to do is just keep like a breadcrumbs document where put little breadcrumbs for future Fleur. And maybe that's all you want to be doing right now is like, oh, that thing that Fleur and Jess said just then about this thing of online stuff, maybe that's going to turn into something down that, like, there's a breadcrumb. Just something so that next time you sit down at the computer and open it, you're not like, okay, I've got to write. Instead, you're like, oh, I'll pick up on this breadcrumb. Something like that would be really nice.
And I think breadcrumbs would be a really interesting way to sort of use this last 10 minutes that we've got together in terms of, and it's come up in a couple of questions, but in terms of like genesis, starting points, what are the ways that we, for works of art that have been quite innovative with the structure that we've chosen and the form in which it's been held, how have we come up with those? How has it happened? Because what you said about breadcrumbs, I found really interesting because I do that with articles that I find and just go, ooh, what a great scenario, or what a great thing, or but also those don't, it's not just research, it also comes from our own lives and our experiences. And I know for me in the last 6-7 years or something, it occurred to me that I could write about growing up in quite a traditional Jewish educational system. Previously I thought, what's interesting in a play about that? And now I'm realizing heaps. And it's meaning that I'm getting a lot of my structural choices from ritual or organizational or regular kind of ways that things are done in my community that other people might not know about. And I guess we started talking about that a bit before, of just like where do these ideas come from? And the other thing that I think about is that sometimes what play is about can heavily inform the way that we structure it. So one of my children's plays that has been the one that is most regularly put on compared to any other things I worked on. It's called Compass. And basically I knew a couple things. I knew that I had a commission to write a play for sort of 10 to 13-year-olds and needed to write it for about 16 actors. I thought, where is a world where it's not just, I knew also I didn't want them to be playing too many adults, because I hate the idea of like, you're all a bunch of child actors and we're thinking that the only way that we can make you work properly is you have to play adults. Like, that's never really appealed to me as someone who writes for young people. And then I thought, where are all the things that can happen, and where are all the places that I had the most sort of pertinent, memorable experiences? And for me, school camp was just absolutely up the top of the list. Then I guess I was reflecting on all the stuff happening in Australia and the things about Australia that kept me up at night. For me, that's often a constant as well. What are the things that keep you up at night are often things you want to write a play about. And I thought, wow, what about a school camp where their moral compass is tested? And then little structural quirks became things like, I knew I wanted moments where each actor could have a direct address sharing the internal struggles they were going through. And then I thought, where does that happen on a school camp where you're always in these little groups and packed in? And I thought, of course, if they need to dig a hole to go to the toilet, there's something magical and endowed about the shovel that they have, and it's called Doug because it digs. And Doug is the thing that they pick it up and they tell us their story. So for me, that was the sort of thing you only come up with when you're writing a camp story and you realize you want a moment that lets you realize what people are really thinking. So that was kind of a fun, for me, a way of playing with structure that it was quite a kind of typically structured play. It built up to the climax, it went down to the resolution, but it did quirky things that I think only I would want to do. And maybe there's that as well. We can't enforce a creative structure onto something that's not natural to the unique way that we see the world. Yeah.
We've got a couple of questions here that we should get to, but just want to say, yeah, absolutely, the limitations of this is how many actors you're working with. Like, that can be such a good, with terrestrial for State Theatre Company, I was told 2 or less actors. So I'm like, okay, why are there only 2 people in this world? And that question was a good starting point. Yeah. Jamila, hello.
Jamila, what ways of making or presenting theatre that you've used during the pandemic do you think you'll be continuing with post-pandemic? Cool.
I mean, I think we all as theatre people are just discovering online, and there's absolutely artists who have been doing this online storytelling for a while before us. So I don't want to pretend that like I invented doing a thing on Zoom. Absolutely didn't. So there is wonderful art already out there online. Something that I really hope we keep playing with is just how blurry that line is. Sometimes, and I think this is particularly true in Melbourne. When I come into Adelaide, it feels a little less so, but the art forms can be kind of regimented. I went to an opening night at State Theatre Company in Adelaide a year or so ago with a friend of mine who's in opera. And I was like, oh God, I can't leave him behind. He won't know anyone. He knew everyone. And maybe that's just like, you know, Adelaide artsy gay knows every other Adelaide artsy gay. I don't know. But like, I was like, wow, I would not know anyone at an opera opening in Melbourne. So I'm hoping that, I think something that we're getting is a bit of a blurrier definitions between art forms, much more of this sense of we're all in this together. I mean, you know, Jamila's just recently written this beautiful article on Arts Hub about access and about online performance. And also particularly as we're talking to people in regional Australia, like I really hope we hold on to like putting art out there so that people can come however they can come, you know. It's been really fascinating as well as a teacher, you know, in the midst of people complaining about COVID. My student with disabilities is like acing it. It's like, this is the lowest barrier to entry to being at uni there's ever been. They can attend uni from their bed. That is so good. I had so many students in class sick the other day and they were all just there in their beds and it was fine. And it's so good. So I really hope that we keep holding on to making theatre so that any of us, just lowering the barrier of entry to getting to the theatre and consuming art. But all these questions that we're asking, the dexterity of our minds in terms of thinking about how we make art, there's never going to be a time where we're like, oh shit, I'm too flexible. I'm too good at adapting to like weird new circumstances. What am I going to do with that? We are building these muscles as artists for adapting, for changing, for thinking of new ways to do things, and that will always be a plus.
And then I think we'll just jump on to Jai's question, and that will probably be the one that we end on. Can you believe it? How do you think the theatre landscape will change post-COVID-19?
I just feel like I've just ranted a bit about what I hope it will change, Jess. Like, how do you think it will change?
How do you think? Well, I think that there'll be a lot more appreciation for live arts. I think for a lot of us who've been artistically inclined, there was a generalized sort of fatigue and exhaustion and just, you know, can I afford to spend that for something I may not even love, and all that sort of just like excuse making about participating in the arts. Of course, separate to the fact that there are also many access issues with the arts that you've touched on, and that I agree we need to maintain the fact that it's been better in a pandemic for people to access the arts than previously, and that, you know,
so grim. That's such a grim thought.
Yeah. So I look forward to seeing more work and embracing seeing more work. I think maybe we will have some sort of hybrid, like Fleur alludes to, of work that perhaps you can experience live and you can also experience from your screen, and no version of that art is lessened by the location that you choose to take it from. Yeah.
I think as well, you touch on a really good thing, a good point around the exhaustion. I had 2 shows open a week apart last year. It isn't like I have a show opening every week. Just weirdly, everyone likes programming my works in April, and then I'll have a year gap, and then everything will happen again in April. I don't know. It's weird. But having 2 opening nights a week apart just really made me be like, wow, maybe theatre people hate theatre. Like, people both of us, those opening nights were so exhausted. The opening night of my adaptation of Slaughterhouse-5, when they announced the running time, everyone groaned. The whole other night of the run with these non-theatre people were people like, oh God, you're going to tell me a story for 2 hours? Like, everyone was just like, wow, someone put this whole novel on stage in 2 hours. That's kind of cool.
Now I make a joke, I'm so desperate for theatre, I'd even sit in a Shakespeare.
Yeah, but I just think, like, I really hope everyone gets some rest in this time and comes back ready to actually like theatre again. Because I was like, seriously, guys, is it that bad? Is it that bad that we all have to be walking around tired? Can we build up the flames of love for this thing again in this time? I always remember seeing a play. I won't mention the prominent theatre maker's name, but they came to this play and they were so pissed off at being there. And at interval, they got up to leave. And I was like, just so you know, this is interval. There's a whole second act. And they were livid. And this was several years ago. And I remember being like, okay, I never want to be that. I always want to be the most excited person in the room to be seeing theatre. I always want to remember the worst crime someone has done is tried to tell me a story. Like, people have, I hope that we lose some of that. I hope that we get better at just like celebrating how lucky we are to see art and what a beautiful thing it is that people just want to tell us a story. Like, God, we're lucky.
What a beautiful way to end our chat.
Me bitching about some unknown industry professional. Yeah. No.
The circuit breaker that's happening that we didn't ask for, but who knows what will kind of grow out from those, you know, that new ground that we're living on. Well, thank you so much. It's been really fun to chat, and we're about to go on to a separate chat with Toolkit's regional playwriting participants, but people who are viewing us on YouTube, here is the point where we say goodbye. But if questions popped up, feel free to kind of keep them on the chat where you've been or send them to us. We're pretty easy to find. So any last things you want to
really chatty, guys. Just yell out if you want to chat.
Well, you've got your play coming up soon, and so we all must participate in that if it is online.
Yes. I mean, I did message the producer today and be like, are we allowed to say? And he was like, well, technically no, but sort of yes.
Not for me.
Sort of yes. Maybe just keep an eye out for the word rebel and just see what happens. But also we maybe already mentioned fringe. Yeah, such a delight to talk to you, Jess, as always. It's just even nicer that some other people got to join us and listen in, but we could do this once a week. Let's just keep going. Yeah,
definitely. And thanks for everyone's comments and questions. It's been lovely, and we'll see you all later. Bye.